So I'm sitting in the churchyard, not far from my home. I'm sitting in the sun. The sky is blue. It's pretty warm. My wife would say global warming, Richard. But anyway, it makes me feel really good. Okay, it's a beautiful churchyard also. Birds, trees. Birds, trees, history, you could say. The inhabitants, on the whole, pretty quiet, but interesting reading their gravestones. Yeah, it has been kind of tumultuous couple of days for me. I've been talking to some extraordinarily interesting people whose identity I shouldn't say too much about right now. It can be revealed later, I hope. And I also had a long Zoom interview with a journalist from the Sun, who is interested in the similarities, links between the Dutch case of Lucy Letby and the British case of Lucy Letby, and of course the similarities are awe-inspiring. I mean, they at a high level there are big structural similarities, all kinds of detailed levels, personal levels, individual levels. There are similarities, and of course the similarities are due to the fact that they are both exactly similar witch hunts of utterly classical form, just like the witch hunts of 400 years ago or whatever. Of course, this was another of the things I've been looking at recently. Peter Hayes, Hayes, absolutely brilliant lecture on witch hunts, and also about the structure of witch hunts. He talks about two kinds of witch hunts, but I would say two phases of a witch hunt. Of course, an initial phase and a secondary phase, and they were classical. They were always there in the past, in what we nowadays recognise as witch hunts, and they are there now. That's also awe-inspiring, seeing that absolutely spelt out in detail, and the lists of methods used to detect and determine and to convict witches, and to gain the support of the public. Right? There is a kind of a phase when experts have been called in because there's something horrible going on, and they might be religious people or lawyers or policemen or whatever. Doesn't make any difference. They are authority figures, entrusted by society to investigate things like this and to prosecute such things like this if they find evidence, and they are trusted. And they use certain techniques, tried and trusted techniques, the techniques which nowadays gain convictions. How to get a jury, how to convince a jury, how to convince the public is basically the same. And it works. And police, inspectors and CPS, civil servants, bureaucrats, they learn what works and they use it, and they're allowed to use it because the law is how it is, and the system is how it is. Now, talking about Lucy Letby and Lucy Letby, there is an enormous difference, which is that in England you have an adversarial system and a jury system. Those are two differences, right? And in the Netherlands you have the two alternatives, usual alternatives. You have an inquisitorial system, and decision making is in the hands of naturally a board of judges, an inquiry, the leaders, the people running an inquiry, right? But still, public support must be gained for it. The court hearings. We live in a democracy. We want open justice. So, also in the Netherlands, it's vital to have the support of the public and to gain the support of the public. And the public prosecutor knows that. I mean, okay, defense lawyers know that, but judges know that. The judges who finally write out their arguments in the Netherlands in full detail, including the famous chain argument, the same argument used by Judge Goss. The same argument. If you're certain she killed this baby, then you don't need so much to be certain that she's killed another one too. It's actually, it is logical. It's Bayesian reasoning with uncertainty. The argument is correct. The problem is the premises, because in a legal situation, certainty is not certainty to begin with. It's something like 90% or 95% sure. Then it is. And we, charitably call that beyond reasonable doubt. But beyond reasonable doubt doesn't mean certain, but people feel it is certain. It's what people, it's the degree of certainty which makes people feel that drastic action is justified, right? Shutting somebody else up for life in a oubliette, the way you probably forget to throw in scraps of food from time to time, consigning someone to oblivion and death alone is right. One needs to have some degree of certainty that was the right decision, and the degree of certainty is not very much. And the public's degree of certainty, the whole point of the jury in England is that it's ordinary people who have become convinced, by looking at the accused person in the face and judging their character, have become convinced that they are guilty, that the stories told by the prosecution are true, and that the person indeed is a heinous, evil psychopath, right? Which the jury, the public, feels in their gut and in their bones because of the presentation by the prosecution of the so-called overpowering circumstantial evidence, right? All these incredible sort of proofs that Lucy is a liar because she couldn't remember what pajamas she was wearing when she was arrested. It's ludicrous, and that she appears in court to cry more with sorrow and pain for her own situation than for those poor babies. Oh my God, look, she cried for those babies years ago, and she's now been broken down, and she's been persecuted for 7 years constantly by a huge constellation of powers, all trying to kill her, basically, trying to put her away, and trying to convince and trying to get all the people behind that decision. Who wouldn't cry in that situation? I don't understand people who say, well, okay, lots of people don't have a great deal of empathy, and maybe not so much information, and of course lots of people do tend to have trust in authority figures, even though we're told that nowadays people don't anymore. People don't believe science anymore. People don't believe this, that, or the other. But actually, they still have an innate, and it's supported by the ridiculous wigs and gowns and stuff, and the whole sort of church-like, religious-like atmosphere of a court. It is imposing, and it's meant to cause emotionally a feeling of overpowering authority and reliability. And it works. That's why it's like that, because it does work. It does work. And of course, it has to work, because if our legal institutions send people to well, I mean, they used to hang them for heinous crimes, the people do need to be convinced that this was just. How do you convince them? They're not going to understand all the scientific stuff, but they'll be impressed by a whole procession of professors and doctors talking gravely about complicated things which people don't really know much about. That is certainly very impressive, and they are impressed. The whole point of the trial, the jury trial, is to make the jury feel in their gut. Well, first of all, to feel in their guts the horror of the crimes, alleged crimes, and secondly, to feel in their guts that they are associated with this individual, who's therefore a despicable, evil individual, not worthy of any, hardly worthy, not worthy, just totally only worthy of destruction. That's the point. It's also the point in the inquisitorial system. The point of an inquiry, also in the UK, is to convince the public of things which the system already believes proven, and needs to have the support of the population behind the consequences which they are imagining to take, working out what they're going to be. Yes, now this was one. This was sort of one side of my recent experiences. The other thing is getting in contact with some people who drew. My attention has been brought to something to something which actually many people have already noticed, which is incredibly odd. Let me mention two incredibly odd facts. One is so many twins and also a triplet in the Lucy Letby case. And twins and triplets who are at high risk and whose situation had a lot of cause for concern, even before they were born already, concerning high risk pregnancies, births, and now neonatal care. So many. How many twins and triplets did Countess of Chester take care of in the past? I don't suppose anybody knows, but it would be very interesting to know, and it would be very interesting to know how many they've cared for since 2017, 15, 16, but since 2016, in fact, since the unit is essentially level 1 unit. Now, those twins and triplets, there's another thing. They were arriving at the Countess of Chester from some of the best level 3 maternity units in the country, namely in Liverpool, particularly in Liverpool. Several really big, academic teaching hospitals with everything, and with absolutely top of the notch, top level for the UK maternity care, with all the facilities and the staff. Well, maybe not with all of them, but with enough. With at least the staff and the facilities, doctors and nurses and apparatus and everything, and hygienic hygiene, etc., etc. All the stuff which is needed to give level 3 care to extremely in really, really risky cases, which were being transferred to a grotty on paper level 2, but effectively level 1, neighbouring maternity unit. What the beep is going on there? How could this be? Were these babies transferred out of a level 3 unit down to, I'm just going to say level 1 unit, because that's what it effectively was, down to a level 1 unit? Well, there are a number of answers one could give, and at present I tend to the idea that what is going on here is basically triage. Of course, capacity in those hospitals is limited. They can't care, they only have so many cots, right? They only have so many nurses, they only have so many specialists, and so on and so forth. The capacity is limited, and so they are obliged to make those awful decisions, which is called triage, which means you decide to care for cases where you think there's a chance that you can do a lot of good, a real chance that you could do something significant, and you unfortunately have to not dedicate your resources to cases where it is pretty clear there's not going to be much you can do. It might, you never know. Of course you never know. So I think parents were being sent off to Chester, and I think they were being told lies, because I think they were told that this was a nice place where there's where mothers and babies are very well cared for, and that's probably, we think it's the best for your case too. But I'm sure whoever made those decisions did not think it was the best place for them, except in the sense that it was a place where they could be, lovingly, and let's hope professionally cared for in their probably last days of life. That this is also a good thing, the thing you must sometimes decide to do. What doesn't happen is telling the parents, being completely honest to the parents. So, and when you look at what some of those babies had, or their mothers had, what the twins and the triplets seem to have had, there's a diagnosis which keeps cropping up, well, a few times. It's called TTTS, which means twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. And this is babies actually sharing a placenta. And typically, one of the babies doing much better out of it than the other. That's what, and sometimes, in many cases, when TTTS is determined in pregnancy, which of course is when you get the clues that the mother has it, but it's often decided actually to abort the weaker twin or triplet then and there in utero, and this does happen. And one of the babies transferred to Countess of Chester was the surviving twin of such a pair of babies. Now, these are things which the jury was not told about. Of course not. Okay. I mean, this is the shocking things which doctors do have to do in their daily practice. They have to make life and death decisions, including death decisions. They cannot do their utmost for every patient who knocks on their door. Some of them they determine it would be wise in the sense of conserving their resources for ones where it's more likely to make a positive difference, more likely to make a positive difference than others. This happens. Of course, it happens. I mean, we all know it happens in war. Which soldiers are you going to patch up? You want them back on the front fighting, and ones which can't be patched up, you don't have the resources to give them the medical care which otherwise might at least save their lives, or So this is fascinating. And I want to mention just one statistic which came out of Thirlwall recently, which really underlines the enormity and the amazingness of what was going on at the Countess of Chester. And Thirlwall has published a list of all the deaths. Okay, they're not just deaths at Countess of Chester, but also deaths of babies who left Countess of Chester to elsewhere. But there are deaths associated with Countess of Chester. And her bureaucrats have marked what was the cause of death as far as is sort of legally and medically known at the moment. So, some of them had autopsies and it was natural deaths, but they became judicially, they became, from a legal point of view, murders actually, and the court and the jury have agreed more or less agreed, sometimes only guessed, what the cause of death was. I mean, the cause was Lucy Letby, obviously, if they were murders. But how she did it is sometimes a matter of conjecture. Well, I think there's nothing wrong with that. You can be convinced somebody has murdered somebody else. You can be rightly convinced that somebody is a murderer without actually knowing how they actually did it, and thereby actually only relying on circumstantial evidence. And part of the circumstantial evidence can be you already know they murdered some other people, and in what way, and you see similarities, enough similarities. Of course, in witch hunts, the similarity is mostly that they're different, which proves how refined the person is, the killer is. And one of the important pieces of a witch trial's evidence is that you don't even know how it happened, which proves again how incredibly devious and evil the person is you're trying to throw onto the flames or whatever. I mean, it's a sort of a civilized lynching. Civilized, I mean, it's a lynching in a civilized country, not civilized in the moral sense, but civilized in the sense of living in cities and having bureaucrats and police and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean to say that people are morally civilized. I mean, what does it mean? No, what I wanted to say was, you look at that list and you notice that actually there is a patch of half a year, a bit more than half a year, where there are 10 deaths which are not attributed to Lucy, and that there's absolutely zero reason to attribute them to Lucy. I forget if it's 10 or 8 or whatever at the moment, but anyway, I think it was 10. There's 10. They're all sitting in about half a year, like the winter months of 2015, 2016. Winter and spring, maybe autumn, winter and spring. It's like Lucy has lulls a bit in her killing, but 10 babies die. 10 babies die in a unit where, according to both the statistics of the past and in the words of Breary and Jairam to the police, they normally only have 3 deaths a year. Right, so whether or not the other deaths were murders by Lucy or not, there were 10 deaths which were not murders in a unit where normally there are 3 deaths a year. And by the way, in my opinion, Breary and Jairam must be aware of that, must know that. I mean, Jairam is maybe not, because he just sort of tags along behind Breary, his mate Breary. Oh, I see a brimstone butterfly. That's lovely. A brimstone butterfly. Okay. I think Breary, or even, I think Breary said, look, by May we'd already had 3 deaths. And, that's our quota for the year. Now, Breary is the guy who sends the neonatal death statistics, mortality and other statistics to Embrace UK, and his name is on all their reports as contributing consultant, as a neonatology hobbyist. Does he read his own reports? Does he know? Has he seen the data? I mean, he contributes his data. He knows that 10 natural deaths in half a year is stunning. It means something extraordinary is going on. He should know that. If he doesn't, he's consciously being blind, or evil. I mean, he can just be evil. The general feeling these days is that, they called in the police. They didn't actually believe that Lucy had been killing babies, but they wanted to scare her off and get her out, because she was filing all those Datix reports. And they were worried. They were deeply concerned about the basic criticism which they had got in the RCPCH report. They were shit scared for their jobs, for their skins. Let's have a little diversion. Let's have a police investigation. Who knows what will come of it? I mean, I think they were just tossing a dice there. I don't believe that they believed that Lucy was killing babies. They knew they were weird, very weird. Well, I think they knew what was going on. And if they didn't, they should be fired and chucked out of the medical profession for criminal incompetence. Really. Yeah. So anyway, getting back to the twins, TTTS and TTTS. So I just want to mention that Liverpool Women's Hospital has got a world famous research group on twins, and with some very important people involved in that research, which does generate a huge amount of research money and fame. And I guess these people ought to know more about this. And I'm not saying that they are personally responsible for sending babies away from their hospital, which should have been careful there, and that they were doing that in order to get good statistics in their trial. I'm not saying that in their scientific research. I imagine that it's all written in the protocol of their studies, which has been approved by an ethics committee and a science committee, exactly what the procedures are about admitting babies into a trial, a clinical trial, longitudinal, even partly randomized. I'm not quite sure. They are running experiments on treatments. They hope to show certain treatment reduces mortality by 50%. So they have a lot of interest in very carefully selecting the population of patients to their study. Legitimate interest. a legitimate interest. You don't test a new treatment on patients for whom you are a priori essentially certain there's no point. There's no point in doing that. There's no point in doing that. And one can discuss the ethics of it, but I think a big research hospital ethics committee understands the ethics of this and knows, right? It's all resources and lives and chances of lives, chances of saving lives and the costs of the resources. And you want to, if you are pretty sure that a certain treatment is going to save lives in the future, you want to test it in a fair way, in a very fair way, scientifically responsible, unbiased way. And you have to be very, what's the word, careful, stingy. You have to be careful with your resources. And these are issues which are, addressed every day in hospitals all over the UK where clinical trials are going on by ethics committees. And if they're doing their work properly, they are aware of the ethical issues, and they are enormous, and it is very, very difficult, and it is, I would say, well understood. Okay, so I'm basically more optimistic than ever that Lucy will eventually come out of jail, get out of jail free. I'm still uncertain, completely uncertain whether it's going to be 1 year, 2 year, 10 or 20. I have no trust in the UK criminal justice system. I'm not saying it's much worse. I'm not saying it's much worse than others. After all, Lucy Letby was convicted in the Netherlands. It took 5 years from the absolutely definitive conviction. At which point, by the way, a book had been published which essentially exploded the complete case against her. So like everybody who had eyes to see and the intellect to be able to read and study and get through all those pages could see it was a miscarriage of justice. It took 5 years. It took 5 years of fighting and very strong opposition, and all kinds of nasty things went on, to which I can personally bear witness. But it was, and despite the pain and stress it caused, it was worth it, of course. So whether we should expect it to take 10 or 20 years in the UK, I really don't know. It's clear that a system which does not learn from mistakes is doomed to repeat them. A system which does not learn from mistakes is doomed to repeat them. UK needs criminal justice reform because it is at the moment structurally ignoring mistakes, ignoring likely mistakes. And of course it has a sort of immediate interest in doing that. Must not rock people's trust in their institutions. Well, sorry, sometimes you must rock people's trust in their institutions, and it was only people doing that who got the Liverpool 6 out of jail, and the Guildford 4, and Andy Malkinson, and Sally Clark, and the list goes on. And the CCRC was put out there as basically as a political sop to the public to do something about that, and maybe it did do something about it for a year or two, but by now it has now become just another way to draw out the agony and make sure that convicted people stay convicted as long as possible, and preferably till they're dead, because that then complaints tend to die down, and only some academics may still be interested, or revolutionaries. Okay, that's it for now. 35 minutes.